In today's tutorial, we're going to be making this love letters snappy pouch, and it's got this sweet little ruffle on it. So it's got a snap closure, and the inside is lined, so there's no raw edges in it, and the corners are boxed a little bit so that it gives it a little bit of depth, so you can add some extra stuff to your little pouch. And then I've added a ruffle all the way around the edge to give it this really sweet look. And so my daughter was like, oh, that looks like a love letter. So we're going to name this the Love Letters pouch. So I'm going to show you how to do this in today's tutorial. And the pattern is available on my website, bythebaybagco.com. And in the pattern, it's going to include a template to get this rounded edge at the top of your fabric for the fold over of the envelope. So be sure to grab that at that link. So for this pattern, you are going to need some quilting cotton, and you can make this out of 2 fat quarters. So it's a super budget friendly, scrappy friendly project. So I have one for my lining, and I have one for the outside fabric. We're going to make today's yellow and white. And then you'll need your ruffle. And I did this by cutting multiple strips out of the fat quarter so that you don't have to have a huge long length of fabric, because you need about 52 inches for your ruffle. And instead of buying 52 inches of fabric and making one long piece, we're going to use up what we have. So if you have a fat quarter, you can cut your strips out of the fat quarter and equal it out to the length that we need for this pattern. So you need those. You'll also need a ruler. You will need a pair of scissors or a rotary cutter to cut everything out. And then you'll need some clips or some pins just to hold everything together. I love these little clips, so I have a whole big basket of those, and matching thread and your sewing machine and all the regular stuff that you need for a sewing project. So let's get started. I also forgot to tell you, you need some quilt batting. You need a piece just big enough for the front of your pouch to fit on. So you'll need that and some sort of marking tool. I'm using a Hera marker to make the lines on here to quilt on. So let me zoom in closer and show you how to do that. Okay, so we're going to mark all of our quilting lines on here. So I just cut my quilt batting, just a rectangle big enough to fit this piece on. The first step that you're going to do, though, is you are going to cut out your pattern piece, and it gives you the measurements in the pattern, and then you're going to use the template provided to cut this rounded edge on both this and your lining piece. The reason why you're going to keep your quilt batting a little bit bigger is when you quilt this, it can shift a little, and then that way you can trim it up to match your fabric when you get done. So you don't have to cut the quilt batting out exactly like the pattern piece to start. So I'm going to use this thing called a Hera marker, and it's just a little plastic tool that has like this sharp rounded edge on it, and it makes a line on your fabric without actually marking a line on your fabric like with ink. So I am going to use my ruler, and I'm going to do diagonal. So I'm going to go from this corner straight up here, and I'm just going to run this along here, and see, it makes a crease. So let's do that a couple of times to make a good crease on there. And then I'm going to move it over 2 inches, and I'm just going to go 2 inches all the way across both sides. Okay, once you have all your lines going one direction, then we're going to go the other direction. You can quilt this in any pattern that you really want. You could do squares, you could just do lines. I like doing these diagonals to make like big diamond shape quilting on there. That's what I did on this one. So I don't know if you can see the quilting stitching lines on here, but they're diamonds. Okay, once you have all those lines marked on there, then I'm going to take some pins. You can also use spray basting if you want to. I'm going to use just pins, and I'm going to pin all over to make sure that my fabric doesn't shift off of the quilt batting. You can also use safety pins. Okay, once you have that pinned all over like that, you're going to take this to your sewing machine, and you're just going to stitch along all of these lines that you made for your quilting pattern. I like to lengthen my stitch when I'm quilting just a little bit, so I'll probably do it at about a 5, because that will prevent any like puckering or gathering, and it goes quicker. Okay, so we're going to quilt all of these lines. I'm just going to start on the first one, and I'm going to quilt across these lines going one direction and then back going the other direction. Okay, that went pretty quickly, so I've got all of my lines quilted onto just the front side of your pouch and the quilt batting. So let's move on to the next step. All right, I finished quilting my first piece and I trimmed off all of the excess batting from around that. Now we're going to work on our ruffle. So you're going to take your strips from your ruffle and you're going to place them right sides together. I'm trying to see just the right side of this fabric. It's kind of hard to see. So you're going to put the short ends right sides together and you're going to make it into one long strip. So I'm just going to sew this down at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then I'm going to add the other strip right sides together and make sure that this middle piece is not twisted in any way so that you get one continuous long piece. And then I'm going to take it over to my iron and I'm going to iron these seams open. And then I'm going to iron this also in half long ways all the way down the entire strip. So I'll be right back. I've got my strip all ironed nice and flat with the wrong sides together. So where your seams are, you want your wrong sides together. And then you're going to take the ends, the short ends, and you're going to fold them with right sides together. So the opposite way of how you just ironed it. And we're going to sew along this edge at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. This is going to finish the edge of your ruffle. So you're going to do that on both ends, back stitching at the beginning and the end. And then once you have that sewn, you can flip it back right side out. And you can use something like this, which is a point turner. I have these on my website also, which makes a great little tool to poke out those corners nice and sharp. And you can take this back over to your iron if you want to and press this nice and flat. I'm just going to use my fingernails and give it a good press. So then the end of your ruffle will be finished. So do that on both ends. Okay, now that we have both ends finished, I'm going to run a gathering stitch 1/8 of an inch from the raw edges of the ruffle. So that's going to not only sew it together, but it's going to give us a gathering stitch. So you're going to set your sewing machine to the longest stitch length it will take. Mine is a 7, and then mine has this automatic thread cutter, so sometimes I end up with a short little tail at the end. So pull out a long tail for your gathering stitch and don't back stitch. You're just going to start stitching. You're going to stitch all the way down with the longest stitch length that there is. And when you get to this end, pull out another long tail so that you have something to grab onto to gather your stitches with. And then you're going to take your ruffle and you're going to fold it in half lengthwise. So I've matched up the two finished ends here and found the center, and I'm going to mark the center of this with either a marking pin or a straight pin, or you can cut a little notch out if you want to. I'm just going to put a pin in it so I know where the center of this is, and then set this aside. Okay, now that I've run my gathering stitch all the way down the long side of my ruffle, I've also marked the center by matching up the two finished ends and pulling it nice. Oops, sorry. Pulling it nice and straight and finding the center mark, and I've marked that with a pin. And it may look a little wonky because I just had to pick this completely out and redo it because I marked something wrong on here. So we're just going to continue going. Okay, now you're going to take your piece that you've quilted, you're going to fold it in half, and you're going to find the center point of the top. And I'm going to mark that with a little air erasing marker. So I'm just going to mark the center point right here so we know where the center top of our curve is. And then you're going to take your ruler and you're going to measure up 6 inches, not where I marked it earlier because I did that at 8 inches and it messed up the whole thing. 6 inches up from the bottom, and you're going to make a mark. So see, even people who have been sewing their whole lives will mess up occasionally. So, okay, so you're gonna make a mark here and a mark here at 6 inches. And then we're going to take our ruffle and we're gonna match up the center mark with the top up here, matching up the raw edges. And I'm just gonna pin that in place. Whenever I'm doing gathers or a ruffle, I like to use pins because it holds them in place a little bit better. So then you're going to take one side, make sure it's not twisted, and you're going to put it about a 1/2 of an inch up from that 6-inch mark. So we made a mark right here. Let's double check. It's up 6 inches. I'm going to pin the end of this about 1/2 of an inch above that. And then you're going to take your bobbin thread and you're going to pull just the bobbin thread. And when you do that, that's why you want to leave long tails when you're gathering something. The bobbin thread will allow you to pull in gathers. So when you pull it, it just kind of scrunches up. And as long as you're holding this bobbin thread, you can slide those little gathers down the length of your ruffle. So you're going to continue to do this until this big long piece fits inside this curve right here. And I just wind the thread up on my finger as I go. You're leaving your top thread hanging out down here. Don't pull that one. And there's lots of different ways that you can ruffle or gather a ruffle. You can take a piece of twine or yarn and you can zigzag across it, not catching it, and then pull that twine and it will gather. You could run 2 rows of gathering stitches if you want them super, super even and pleated. Yeah, there's all different kinds of ways you can gather a ruffle. All right, so I gathered this side and got it all matched up and pinned along this edge of the curve. So I'm doing this side. So once you get it gathered to where it's a little bit smaller, you can kind of move these little gathers around so that they lay flat and they're nice and even and neat and tidy and all that. And so then I just pin this. I like using pins when I do gathers because it keeps it a little more secure than the clips do. And that way the gathers don't like stretch out or shift or anything like that. But you use this technique to gather anytime you're putting on a ruffle or you're gathering the waistband of pants or skirts. If you were going to make a tiered skirt, you would use this. If you were going to add a ruffle, say to the bottom of a sleeve or bottom of the pants, you use this gathering technique when you put in sleeves on shirts. So learning how to gather something, not just a ruffle, and practicing that technique comes in a lot in sewing. I mean, you use gathering stuff a lot. So I'm just going to finish pinning this around, and then I'm going to baste this on about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, just to keep the ruffle in place for the next step. Okay, once you have your ruffle all basted on here, you're going to take this and you're going to fold this up at the 6-inch marks. Oh, got a big long thread in there. You're going to fold this up at the 6-inch marks, and you want to leave, that's why we put the ruffle about a 1/2 of an inch, 1/4 to a 1/2 an inch above that, because you need a little bit of space here for when we box the corners. So you're going to fold this up, and you can use clips here if you want to. And we're going to sew these side seams at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Be sure that you've changed your stitch length back to your normal like 3.5 or 4 once you've got done basting and gathering. All right, once you have your sides sewn at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, we are going to take this and we're going to box these corners. So you're going to put your hands inside and open up your pouch at a diagonal like this, and you're going to match up this seam with where the bottom crease is. So sometimes it helps if you take this and you make a little crease there at the bottom, and you're going to tuck your ruffle in there one way or the other. It doesn't really matter which way, but then make your seam allowance go the opposite direction. So you're just going to pull it out at a diagonal, and then you're going to take a ruler and you're going to measure across. And wherever the ruler fits at 1 inch across, so the edge touches 1 inch here and the end of the ruler there, that's where you're going to make a line to box your corner. So let me get a little marking tool there so I can mark that. So you're going to make a little line to where that little line equals 1 inch. And then you're going to sew across there, back stitching at the beginning and the end. So it should look something like that. And you're going to do that on both sides. And you can kind of feel where the end of your ruffle is on there. That's why you want to leave it about a 1/2 inch up from that 6 inch mark, because hopefully if you did it right, you're not going to catch the end of the ruffle in that seam. I think I might have caught it on the other side. So whenever you flip it, your ruffle won't be caught in this little boxed corner seam right there. So let's see if I did it right. Okay, that one's good. So that one's not caught in there. And you can just leave these little triangles on. It doesn't really matter. If they bug you, you can trim that off, but it's going to be hidden in the inside. Oh, I caught the edge of the ruffle in that seam. That's all right though. It'll work, but it's just caught in that seam right there a little bit. That's okay. Okay, so now you've got your pouch front done. So you're going to set that aside, and now we're going to do basically the same process to our lining piece, except for we're not adding the ruffle on. So you're going to take your marking pen and you're going to measure up 6 inches from the bottom. And then you're going to fold it up on those lines and sew the sides at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, once you have one side done on your lining, on the other side, you need to leave an opening maybe about 3 inches on this side. So I'm just going to mark a spot where I'm going to leave an opening so I can turn this whole thing through. So I don't forget this time, because I forgot and I had to pick it out once again and start over. I really need that matcha. So you're going to start and you're going to back stitch here. So down to here, back stitch. Don't sew this part, back stitch here, all the way down, back stitch at the end. So you're going to leave an opening right here in the middle. Okay, now that we have an opening here in the middle, we're going to pull this and we are going to box our corners, which I already have marked because, wow, this is not a very cohesive tutorial this time. Okay, now we have our lining with our boxed corners. Now we're going to turn it right side out and we're going to put it with our outside of our little pouch. It's coming together. Okay, now that you have your pouch and the outside, all side seams done, corners boxed, and all of that, make sure that your lining portion is right side out, and you're going to put it inside the other one so that the right sides are touching, and get it all lined up. And we're going to match up the side seams, and we're going to clip it or pin it all the way around. I'm just going to use clips for this stage. Okay, and then once you have that clipped, you're going to sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. So You'll sew around. When you get to the side seam, put your needle down. You're going to go down about 1/4 of an inch below this edge and put your needle down, and then you can kind of pivot right there around that corner. I'm going to start in the middle up here on the flat side of my curve. So when I'm coming to this seam right here, I kind of pull it to where it gets, I can get this little section flat. And I'm going to sew down about 1/4 of an inch below this edge so that when I put my needle down, I can lift up my presser foot and pivot this way, and it'll be at the 1/4 inch seam allowance right here. And then you'll just sew across this flat edge. And then when you get close to that other side seam, you're going to do the same thing where you sew 1/4 inch past that seam. And when you lift up your presser foot and you pivot to get this straight and flat, you'll be at the 1/4 inch seam allowance for the rest of your curve. And then back stitch when you get back to the end, and it should look something like that. Now I'm going to take this and I'm just going to make little notches with my scissors almost up to the stitching line wherever it's curved. So what that does is it helps it lay flat when you turn it right side out around a curve. It gives it a little space for this side to stretch out. Just don't clip through your stitches. Okay, once you have that all clipped around the edges, you're going to take this and you're going to find that opening in the side, and you're going to do what's called birthing the bag. You're going to turn it right side out through that little hole. Just be very careful. That's why it's important to back stitch at each one of those spots, because you can potentially rip your seam open if you're not careful. Okay, once you have it turned all the way right side out, I like to push my lining inside it just to make sure that everything lines up nice and straight and I've caught all the edges sewing around, and make sure everything looks good from both sides. And it does. Then I'm going to take the lining back out and I'm going to stitch up this little hole that we just turned it through. You can hand stitch this if you want to, but it's inside in the lining and nobody's really going to see it. So I just take it and tuck in the raw edges and make it nice and straight. And then I'll just sew that at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance just along that edge, just to close up that little hole. And then I trim off my threads. And I'm going to take this over to my iron and I'm going to give it a really good press, making it really nice and flat, because we're going to top stitch around this edge next. I have pressed this really nice and flat, and now I'm going to take this and I'm going to top stitch the curve from where this where it meets up right here with your envelope, so you can kind of feel that from the front. And I'm going to top stitch along here at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around to where that other side is where it meets up. And then I'm also going to top stitch this edge from right here all the way across to there. Might take a little finagling to get it into your sewing machine. All right, the last step of making your love letter pouch is going to be adding a snap to it. Now you could make a buttonhole right here if you have a machine that does buttonholes, and then sew your button on the little inside right here so that it would button close. But an easier way to do that is to use a plastic cam snap. I don't know if you can hear my dog Goose. He's getting very bored sewing this, so he is starting to play. Okay, so cam snaps. You can get the plastic snaps at Hobby Lobby. That's where I got the set with this. This is the Dritz brand, but it only came with white or black or gray snaps, I think is all they have there. So to get all the colorful ones, I ordered a set off of Amazon. And it came with a tool, a pink tool like this, but for some reason that tool doesn't work as good as this one, even though they are the exact same thing. I'm not sure why. So we're going to use my Dritz tool. And I had a question on TikTok, so I'm going to go ahead and answer that question on how to do the plastic snaps in this video, and then I'll show her on TikTok too. So you can find these snaps on Amazon, TikTok Shop, Hobby Lobby. Cam Snaps has some, but they also have a press that you can use. But I think they sell these too. Not sure. Okay, so you can still see the center mark here where I wrote in this air erasing marker. Sometimes when you iron over it, it comes back, but it'll disappear in a little while. It'll just fade away. But you're going to find the center of your envelope here, which is roughly where that is. And then you're going to measure up 3/4 of an inch, and you're going to make a little mark there. And that's where your little snap is going to go. I like to eyeball it, honestly. Sometimes when I measure it, it doesn't come out exactly where I want it. Like this, I would have moved over, but that's okay. Then you're going to take the pokey little thing. I used the green one that came with this set as my stiletto at my sewing machine. So this can double as a stiletto too for when you need to push things through close to the needle on your sewing machine. But it's very, very sharp. And you're going to use that to stab a hole in your project, which is kind of scary. So you make a little hole, and I'm just going to leave that in there for right now because I'm trying to decide what color snaps I want to use with this, because I have this yellow, but they don't exactly match, and I used up all of my white ones. So I have that yellow. Could do that. Have a gray. I wish I had more white ones, but I have used up all of my white ones, and those are just spare parts. I think I'm just going to use one of these yellow ones. So there are 3 different pieces to these snaps. You have the button, which I don't know if it's going to show it close enough. The button side, which looks flat on the back, and then it's got this little like spike in the middle. You're going to use that for both sides of your snap. So you'll need 2 of those, and then you will need the male and the female ends of the snap. So this is the male end where it has something that sticks up, and then the female end is the part that snaps to it. So the female end dips in. I always like to put the female end on whatever's coming down to be snapped, and I like to put the male end on whatever is laying flat, if that makes sense. It doesn't really matter, but that's just how I've always done it. So you'll need a male and female end and 2 of the buttons with the spikes. And then you'll poke your hole with your stiletto on the front, and you will poke your little button side with the spike through that hole. And so you want the flat part on the front, obviously. And then you just kind of work it down in there and push it all the way down. So I'm pushing my fabric all the way down on that spike. And then I'm going to put my female end on top of there. There's a little hole in it. I'm not sure how well this is showing up on camera. You put that on the little spike, and then you're going to put the flat side of your snap in this black part down here, and it should just fit. If your snap kit that you get comes with like different size buttons, there'll be different size, they're called dies, so different size dies to go in your tool. And then this part of the tool has like a squishy rubber thing, and then a bar that goes down, and it's going to smash that little spike that's on that button down. So you just squeeze it, you give it a good squeeze, and then it smushes that little spike down to hold that on. Now, sometimes it won't smush good enough to hold it on there, and you will have to use another one and redo it. I have gone through dozens of them with the pink tool that I had. For some reason, it was not smushing it evenly and getting it on there. So I probably should have returned it to Amazon and got a new one because it was maybe defective or whatever. But since I had this one from Hobby Lobby and it works great, I just used the snaps out of that kit. Okay, so then you're going to fold your whatever you're adding the snap to. In this case, is my little envelope top. You're going to fold it down and figure out where you need the bottom part of your snap to go. So it's going to go about right there. So you can mark it with your marker if you want to. I'm just going to go ahead and make the hole. And you poke the hole in your project. I know, that's really scary to do. And then this time, the button is going to go on the back side. So you find where that little hole went through and work that little spike through there and push it through. Sometimes it will close up on you. So you push that down, all the way down on that little button. And that's really hard to see because the yellows match, but that spike is coming through this fabric. And then you put the male end of your snap down on that little spike. Make sure that that spike is coming all the way through so it gets smashed evenly on there. So this way, when it snaps, it will snap down on this part. And then you just put it back in your tool the same way. Make sure it's laying flat in there, and then give it a good squeeze. And it will flatten out that little spike inside the snap. So it should be on there nice and tight. And then you test your snap. And I always like to test it several times to make sure it's on there good. And I give it a few good pulls to make sure that it's not going to come off, especially when I'm selling things. But that's how you add a little plastic cam snap to your project. It's super, super easy. They come in bunches of colors. You can get kits with all different colors to match your project. I hope that helped you. And we are done with our project. Okay, we're done. It turns out so stinking cute. I think these are going to be really popular at my daughter's markets that she's been doing. She's been doing really well with her bags and all her little pouches that we've been making. So I think these are going to be a great addition to her little market setup. I think they look really cute. They're very girly. They would make great gifts. These would be great for like a bridal shower or a bridal party. You could embroider their names on them, and they could put all of their makeup for the wedding day in there. They make great pouches for diaper bags. I could see you could put a diaper in there and some wipes and take it on the go. Great makeup pouches, travel pouches. You could even use it as a little clutch, little purse. So many uses for these. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope that you make a whole bunch of these. If you do, tag me on all the social media. I'm at By the Bay Bag Co. on everything, and I love to see the fabric combinations that you guys come up with for your patterns. There's been so many fun ones on there. And if you'd like to check out more patterns for beginners or intermediate confident beginner sewing patterns, check out my website, bythebaybagco.com. And if you're just finding this video and you have no idea how to sew and you'd love to have me as your sewing teacher, I also have an online sewing course that you can work at your own pace. It's called Quick Stitch Academy, and you can find that at quickstitchacademy.com or on bythebaybagco.com also. So anyway, I hope you liked this tutorial, and please share all the ones that you make. Leave me a thumbs up, a subscribe, and all those YouTube-y things. Comment down below and all of that stuff. It helps the algorithm and helps push me out to more people who love to sew or would like to learn how to sew. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.